from your, obviously from your knowledge working with clients, whilst of course maintaining confidentiality, and also the research that I know you're well steeped in, could you just talk a little bit about, I won't call it best practice, I'm always wary of the notion of best practice. As soon as employers get lauded for best practice, then suddenly they're brought down by something. But do you see examples of what, it's still a value judgment, I know, we might call good practice in relation to pay transparency?
One of the things, I did some reading, and I found a paper based in Portugal where they have this gender pay gap of, if it exceeds 5%, then the employer is expected to reduce it down across the job levels. And it was interesting. The paper suggested that if once employers got below 5%, I don't know if they didn't care or whether they just used budgets for other things, but things started to slip. So those employers who were below 5% started to be a little bit more open, and their difference, say it was 4.2, crept up to 4.5 because it was still below the de minimis. But that's going to be best practice, because it will raise question marks from stakeholders, employees, and shareholders about why there's creep in the pay gap difference by job level. So that would be one thing I thought was very interesting. And yeah, another paper I came across was talking about the right to information, which is currently in Germany, and take up there was seemed a bit low. So it was this was in 2018. 2.7% of women and 1% of men exercise their right to information, so just under 4% of employees. But when you have large organisations with over 1,000 employees, that's still a lot of queries, and they need to be turned around quite quickly. So best practice, in my mind, is to find a regular rhythm of reporting that, and maybe the pay review outcome letter is the ideal time, or do it during a quiet period if that ever exists in Comp and Ben. So yeah, that was a couple of things based on the academic evidence that I thought were quite interesting. And yeah, and the other thing about, just going back to right to information, is the people who request are those who've got the most concerns. Either they have an employee relations issue, they're unhappy with their employer and they want leverage for that, or they really genuinely think that there is a pay inequity and they want to look at the information. And ideally, you really don't want to be poking the hornet's nest, as it were. Try and manage that in a really proactive way would be one way that I would say is good practice.
That's really helpful. As you say, be proactive. Don't do things as knee-jerk reactions or because you feel forced to do it. Because again, what does that say about the employer? If you're a progressive and good employer, then won't you want to be proactive to the forefront of this? Given the point you made about it's a real shift in perspective being needed, there's also, coming back to the corporate governance context for all of this, we have a wide group of stakeholders in organisations, public, private, third sector, but let's just think about it, say, in terms of publicly quoted businesses. The stakeholders will include, of course, people that have a financial share in an organisation, and of course we've had legislation requiring the say on pay by investors. And investors are going to have, or are already looking at a whole range of factors in assessing the base of their stake. Some of the institutional investors I've been talking with as part of some work, some research around executive reward, they freely admit that sometimes they fall into a trap of, well, we've got very limited benchmarks, and all that's doing is constraining the organisation from being as creative as we then say we want them to be strategically differentiated. On the other hand, we lack the people who are bringing the expertise to ask these questions. But as there's an obligation, and some of the institutional investors and shareholder groups more generally have been a bit wary of the obligation on us now to have a say, to have a vote. Certainly with pay transparency, looking at issues around not just gender pay gaps, but more widely in terms of protected characteristics, but also, of course, CEO versus the average employee gap. this requires those people outside of the organisation, say shareholders, to have their say too. What do you think they should be doing to prepare for all of this? And do you think, is there evidence you've seen that these stakeholders are doing enough to prepare for this fundamental change that you see coming into to position from 2026?
This is really interesting, and so I think pay transparency needs to be on the REMCO agenda, and it needs some form of KPIs to, I wouldn't say enforce isn't the right word, but to give direction to the REMCO about pay transparency progression. And some organisations have that in place already, some don't. So that would be my initial recommendation, is put it on the REMCO terms of reference, and then the agenda, of course. And then in terms of third parties, in a sense, I don't know that it's, to me, it's a nice to have. The EU directive, as it is, has enormous teeth in it. The biggest change is that all employers now will have to prove they've paid fairly, whereas for many countries, the employee has to prove they've been paid unfairly. So employees are going to be in a defensive position anyway. And then you have the teeth through the right to information, you have the gender pay gap reporting, and you have the joint pay assessments where they're needed. So kind of there's enough within the directive to kind of force employers to take this seriously. And then I think we could start to see what's happened in the UK, happened in Europe, which is that there will be a certain group of specialist lawyers who will chase opportunities. And maybe the unions will as well, maybe the equity bodies on a country level may, but I'm sure that once lawyers look at this properly and understand just how much money there is for them, and if you look at, I did some research into the Birmingham and Next cases, and the lawyers there are charging 25% plus VAT. Yes, on a no-win, on the no-win, no basis. The irony is, of course, Stephen, they're taking money from a group who've been mistreated and underpaid for a long time. They're charging them up to, well, nearly 30%, 29%, something like that, of their win, which is only to make this group of employees whole. So they're not getting any profit out of this. And then the lawyers come and take a big cut out of it. It doesn't feel very equitable, but that's my political leanings. That's a separate issue. But certainly I think the directive is going to kind of, enough pressure will come from external that, in a sense, shareholders maybe don't need to worry, apart from making sure the company is paying in accordance with the rules, because the costs are astronomical for some organisations.
Well, indeed, and indeed, there's almost been talk of bankruptcy. We know local authorities, government institutions can't go bankrupt officially, but it's leaving them severely exposed. And clearly, private businesses can go bankrupt. So one needs to think about that. So there's some common sense here, some practicalities to be brought to bear. But very interesting that, as you say, you introduce this notion that there may be some people who, where we're trying to remove, or at least the interventions are trying to remove the notion of exploitation within the effort pay bargain. Hey, we've got another group of very interested people coming along in an exploitative mode. So in all of this, I was not sure whether I'd engage you in a dialogue around the ethics, because we're trying to keep things practical, but actually there's an ethical dimension here. Would you agree?
I think so. When you look at it, well, you look at where we are now, which is we need this legislation because there is pay inequity already existing within the organisation. And then to make, the example of the lawyers in the UK and the 25% cost plus VAT, it does feel a little unfair. But fairness is a societal construct, I heard somebody say once. I'm not sure that's true, but...
Well, certainly, it's something that employers are going to have to take a view on in order to protect their operational status and indeed their viability as a trading institution or as a publicly funded body or with people who serve to oversee what, say, a charitable organisation is doing as their trustees. So this is a really important issue, and if people don't get to grips with it, sadly, it seems all the signs are that they're going to feel a detrimental effect. So better to be prepared. And therefore, again, back to the practicalities, the notion of auditing. Before we get then to producing statements, the evidence, as you said, with the onus on employers to demonstrate that they are being equitable, what sort of steps do you think, and using the 1 year ahead to prepare for it, what would you recommend that organisations and the people advising them take to approach that whole notion of auditing their reward structure?
Yeah, it needs a number of steps. One is the job leveling, and then looking at your pay equity across the whole organisation, and then identifying gaps and considering how you're going to meet those gaps without necessarily disrupting employee relations. If you've got a group who are underpaid, you don't want to give them an uplift in one go because that would potentially raise a lot of questions. The other factor is you'll need to an organisation will need to document their pay policy, pay approach, how you progress through the range, how you get increases. They're very difficult to do because you do it automatically and you've done it for so long that actually sometimes writing it down is a bit like doing process flows, really difficult and something you really don't want to have to do. But that will be the fundamental for protecting the organisation from any unfair pay claims, is getting that documentation and looking at kind of the factors which affect people's ability to move through the range and affects where they are in the range. And some, ensuring that they're gender neutral and ensuring that they're still fit for purpose, because my own experience as well, some of them are pretty old, and kind of tidying that up and making it on a gender neutral basis that is pragmatic and relevant is something for an organisation to consider. It's quite time consuming as well.
Yeah. Well, and that's it. And where resources, as always, are scarce, you've got to make a decision as to whether you're going to invest. People are going to have to weigh up the risks and rewards here. But getting it wrong, certainly reputationally first, but also commercially, could have a significant deleterious effect. So people need to get prepared, which is why I think, as you rightly say, this is a corporate issue. In remuneration terms, should be on the remuneration committee's agenda. And thinking about the notion of auditing, likewise on the audit and risk committee's agenda. I've been recommending that the ARACs and the REMCOs actually combine far more. They're all, after all, committees of a board in their thinking, because risk management, having a risk register, but risk really is only about weighing up strategic choices and consequences and mitigations, but having a view as to how one can gather the evidence together in an audited way. And as you say, having not necessarily done it systematically in the past, well, we do it for our financial accounting, we have to by law, and really this is an extension of that related to pay. So would you advocate that of course it's an issue for the board fundamentally in any organisation irrespective of sector, but that they could well use both their REMCOs and their ARACs individually and collectively to think about taking ownership and oversight of these processes, which are difficult?
I couldn't agree more. I think it's really important that, as you say, it's about choices, and there isn't a magic wand. You don't have unlimited budgets to solve this all in one go, and also understand. If you're a multi-country organisation, looking at your sites, looking at your levels, and organising where you are in terms of your risks. and employee longevity is another factor that you'll need to consider, and kind of building up a heat map of where those risks are, is going to really be time well spent, I think.
Agreed. And as with any initiative, not a one size fits all, because different scales of organizations, life cycle of the organization, startup through to mature, different industry sectors, not just public, private, but subsections within private enterprises, charities, and so on. And also, of course, the notion of culture. The anthropologists, I gather, have given up on trying to define it, but we kind of have a feel for it, how we do things around here, etc. All
Yeah.
of those things potentially are going to colour, and hence I like your idea that there's a heat map, because that allows for variety, but also maybe in a recognisable way for employers to get their hands around this and look for similarities and differences. Is this something that technology, we're steaming ahead with artificial intelligence and so on, big data, machine learning, etc. Is there a role, do you see, for AI in relation to the pay transparency initiatives?
Definitely is. And what we're seeing is, increasingly, AI is able to read a job description and then fit it into a job leveling matrix. Obviously, needs sign off by a line manager who's closer to the role, but that's one of the big changes. And then from there, it can then predict the salary range, and if it even has the CV, it will be able to give you a position in the range. And effectively, I've worked in organisations where that's been several people's jobs, that's taken a while to do. Bang, that's going to be possible to do in 5 minutes by one person. Might need approval and sign off process for sure, but that whole process is going to be streamlined, and it's going to take away. It's a shame, because it's a really important component of doing a job, doing a comp and ben job, that is, to understand those processes. And if it's all done by AI, which will save time, as someone starting out in your career, it's going to be much more difficult to really understand the nuance around it, because you'll just get a result with some background, but kind of understanding how these fit together will be lost, I think. I worry about that. The next area is around SaaS providers. They're able to do a lot of research, taking the job levels or the organizational map, taking the salaries, and then kind of look at pay equities across the organization. So that's existing software. Some of what I've described with AI is in place and coming through now, and some of it will happen in time, but we're not there yet.
It's really interesting. As you rightly say, again, there's a risk management issue here. You need the human sign off. And you're quite right. There's a risk that if people coming in simply use AI as a crutch and don't understand the principles, then in time there's a chance that they'll not be able to give a meaningful sign off, because they won't know exactly what they're signing off. I try with the AI that I work with, and I'm quite involved in social robotics. My side gig for interest as much as anything, and to keep the grey matter running. But I try to use the AIs that I interact with as coaches, so that I'm getting them all the time to explain to me what's the underlying rationale. Even just introducing that notion. Well, let's go through this step by step, and I find it reduces the smokescreen effect, and increases the transparency in itself, which is what we want. And you're learning. So I think for people coming at this is what they need to do. Don't just use it as a crutch mindlessly.
Yeah.
Open yourself up, and okay, it takes more time, but given you've just said you've reduced what could be months of work into very swift activity, I'm sure it's worthwhile. It nicely brings, before we get to our conclusion, I'm conscious, obviously, of the time you're kindly investing, Rachel, in our conversation. But before we wrap up, couple of final things. Let's talk then about these aspirants, these people that want to be comp and ben professionals. They may be undergoing a course of study at the moment. They may be undergoing continuous professional development as they enhance their professional accreditation. Have you got any guidance, any tips that you wish to share? Obviously about pay transparency, but actually as a seasoned professional in this area more generally.
I've never regretted doing comp and ben. I started my career in taxation. I got tax qualified with the Chartered Institute of Taxation, and then got incredibly bored. So, and I love the mixture of people at the forefront, but also numbers and kind of just making people's lives a little bit better in a really positive way, because you have access to you have access to information, and yeah, so I really love that. In terms of career, I'm a little bit out of touch because I don't live in the UK anymore, and so I don't see so much of career development and the excellent work that you do at the university preparing people to move on into their careers. But that would be my starting point: is look at qualifications. They give you a really sound bed of information and awareness, and then you can apply that and just get going. And I think right now, at this moment in time, there will be opportunities in comp and ben, because employers are looking at pay transparency. They're wanting to do job leveling. They're wanting to do pay equity. So if that's something that interests you, that I would suggest that it's a good time to enter the profession, because there will be a need for resources very quickly to do some of the fundamental work.
Profound thoughts. Thank you very much for sharing.
Wouldn't go that far.
I'm sure that will be a great encouragement to people who are dipping a toe in the water, or indeed engaging in a course of study. One of the things that I think is important in bringing people into any area, but seeking to be qualified or accredited, is to engage them not just in going through the textbook, but actually bringing their knowledge. Surely everybody knows something about reward and the effort to get it from childhood. We're engaged in this process. We know what achieves rewards and those things that lead to disbenefits. And so I think having more meaningful dialogue, one of the issues, and it's very difficult obviously for those people who are really just starting out and are still early, well, not even in their career, early educational career. What experience can they bring? Well, that's one way. But actually, as people progress through and maybe return to, say, a higher education institution or wherever, to boost their understanding and qualification, bring those experiences, want to engage in dialogue. There's a reason, isn't there? For you can go to the lecture, and indeed, some institutions, certainly the ancient universities. I know Oxbridge. It almost used to be, well, it's voluntary if you go to the lectures, but you have to come to your tutorial. In a way, for all we can laugh at that, there's some sense in it, in that a seminar or tutorial where you've got to present your thoughts and defend them. Well, actually, isn't that the way you prepare for your working life anyway, when you're dealing with your client, whoever that client is, whether in a full-time job or an external advisor? And likewise, when I often say to people nervous of examination, well, again, this is the time where you set aside your textbooks, unless it's an open book exam. You can't Google or some other form of search the answer. You need to demonstrate that you're thinking systematically, and that's where you're bringing your knowledge to bear. So it's good practice for what you do when you get the call from the chief exec. I'm just about to go before the unions, the shareholders, the media. You pick, and they've got to be ready to make a case. So I think that's the way in which we can encourage people at all levels to come, be willing to have a view, but a little bit like we said with pay transparency, do the audits, think about the framework to bring that to bear. Thank you for all those very, very helpful thoughts and insights. It's always helpful before signing off. Is there anything that I haven't sought to explore with you that you think we could usefully talk about or put on the table?
No, I think you've done a great job of covering all the elements that people need to think about. My takeaway from this is I've been focusing on the REMCO, and I think you're right. There's broader aspects around the risks and the audit committee, and actually there's also a piece of work around, for me, I'm thinking about on personal, around KPIs for them to deliver, or not deliver, drive reporting around pay transparency. So that's been fascinating for me. So thank you. And yeah, it's a really, I feel very privileged to be at this moment in time, because I think big changes are ahead, and I'm delighted to have had a chance to, what's the word? Provide some input to that, because I think it's going to be for the benefit of majority of people through Europe, and I know that won't certain employers, but I've no problem seeing people see their standard of living improve, and I'm delighted to have had a chance to influence it in some ways, speaking personally.
Thank you very much, Rachel. You are a true ambassador then for reward generally, let alone pay transparency and doing the right thing. And who can argue with that? Let's do the right thing. But we need, as we started out, to define the terms of, well, what does that mean? We're not just flying by the seat of our pants. We're having meaningful evidence-based dialogue. I really appreciate it. For me, it's been a rewarding conversation.
Likewise, thank you for the opportunity.